Hello there and welcome once again to Geeky Goblin. I'm Jay Hopkinson and today we're going to be painting some Oathmark skeletons. If you haven't already seen the review of the skeletons, if you look at the previous video to this, you'll be able to see the unboxing and have a good look at the sprues. But what we're going to be trying to achieve today is this. So they're quite old looking, rusty armoured. We want a nice white bone on there so that they really pop on the table. So let's just get right into it. The first step to get that lovely bone colour is we're going to undercoat them with skeleton bone from Army Painter, which is it's not the best spray paint in the world. Sometimes it does come up a bit sort of rough looking, but for these it's perfect. The Games Workshop equivalent would be Xandri Dust, but that's a bit too dark and I don't think you get the nice bone look from Xandri Dust. I think it's about time they released a proper bone colour. So we're just using that, we're just using skeleton bone, so just spray that on, get those undercoated. Right, once they are undercoated, this is where we're at now. They have been undercoated. We've got a nice smoothish coat there. So we've got these four here. These are the ones we're going to be doing. So the first step, very simple. We're going to be using Agrax Earthshade. Now, again, the Games Workshop recommendation of painting them is to use, I think, Seraphim Sepia. But I like using Agrax Earthshade because it makes the recesses darker, like the back of the bone look a lot darker, which is the way I want them. So all we're going to do is we're going to get our Agrax Earthshade and we're just going to liberally apply that to the entire model. It doesn't really matter if you get it on the weapons, on the cloth, anything. In fact, it'll help shade those later anyway. So we're just going to completely cover that model. We're not going to be too precious about it. I'm just going to cover it completely. Not a hard job at all. The only thing we are going to do is make sure that it doesn't pool anywhere that's going to be detrimental to the painting. So we don't really want it pooling at the bottom of the feet because later on we need that area, and we don't want it pooling all over the sword and things. So you don't need to put it on the sword because you're not going to be painting that bone. But it doesn't matter if you do. It doesn't matter if you get it all over at this stage because it's going to get covered up later. So there we go. That's one done. And to be fair, he already looks like a skeleton. Probably because he is a skeleton. So that's one, bashed, done. What we will do is we'll do all four now so that we can let them dry together. I like painting in batches of 4 or 5. I've already done one though, so we'll just do these 4. And then after this, we need to make sure these are completely dry because we're going to be dry brushing them. I actually, to speed things up, as much as it's not very efficient way of heating your house, I like to put them above a radiator with a window open, so you get a bit of a breeze which helps them dry, and then the heat also helps them dry. Or you can, if you're really desperate, you can use a hairdryer. It's another way of speeding up the process, but to be honest, just letting them dry naturally is the absolute best way. So there we go, splash that all over there. You definitely want to make sure that you get those eyes nice and black and the mouth nice. Well, it's not black, is it? It's brown, but they want to be very dark because they're the bits that are going to stand out when you once you've dry brushed everything else. So there we go. That's pretty much, that's it really. Just splash that all over there. I do love painting skeletons. A lot of people don't like it because they don't like having to do the bone, but there's an argument to say that once you've washed these and picked the colours out, they're good enough to go on the table anyway, really. But we're not going to do that. We'll do it right. So if you want to get your paints ready, we're going to be dry brushing this with Terminatus stone. And we're going to be dry brushing before we, there we go, that looks nice. We're going to be dry brushing before we pick any of the other colours out, because we don't want to accidentally cover your cloth or any of the leather straps or anything with the dry brush, because that wants to look nice and neat and smooth. I've kept these moulded bases on for now. My preferred way of dealing with those is after the model's painted. The reason for that is if you clip them off before, then you have to glue them to a base, and if you're being vigorous with your dry brushing, you may well snap them straight back off that base anyway. The only risk you've got of doing it at the end, once the model's painting, is chipping the paint off the feet area that you've already painted. But I'll explain how to do that without messing up the miniature when we get to it. So that's those 4 done in Agrax Earthshade. So there we are. Lovely. So we'll let those dry, and then we'll come back and do a bit of dry brushing. Right, okay, so they're all dry now. As we can see, they already look reasonable. This guy's eye isn't quite as dark as I want it on this side, but we can add that back in later. So the next stage is Terminatus stone dry. So this is a new pot, so it's still got a nice wetness to it. You probably do want it to be a little bit wet. It doesn't, just because we're dry brushing doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be completely dry. So there's quite a lot of paint still on this brush. Now normally the technique is to whittle that down to nothing. Well, not nothing, but a very small amount. But with the skeletons, we're just going to leave it a reasonably wet, and we're just going to start stroking that on there. See how that's already come into life? Change the angle of the brush to get into the more difficult areas. This is very simple. You just sort of, it's almost like wet brushing actually. You're just scraping it along the edges there. That's coming up nicely. You can really go to town on this as well. You don't have to take a long time over it. So don't worry about it looking messy. It'll all fit and nicely drop together later. We're actually going to put another sort of layer on top of this bone later on, because as you can see, the head there, that's not ideal. It looks weathered, so you might like it like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to put another layer of paint on that, almost like a glaze later, so it'll cover up the patchiness of the dry brushing. But again, like I said, if you like that look, if you like the weathered look to the skull, then you're absolutely more than welcome just to leave it like that. Or if you actually just can't be bothered to do another layer on it. I mean, it's nice to have lovely models. If these are minions for a first level D&D encounter that you're never going to use again, then you might well just leave them like that. But, you know, I'm sure they'll be used for something. And if you're painting an army of 200 of them, then you want them to look decent, don't you? But you don't want to spend 4 hours on each one. So this is a way to get, hopefully we'll get these done in about 20 minutes, all 4 of them. There we go, that's what that looks like. Looks good, I like it. See how all the higher areas of bone have come up nice and light. So almost get into that white look that we want. Again, the head is the bit that pops out to people. That's the bit that's people are going to look at. So we'll add a little bit to that later, make that look nice. But there you go, that's a nice bone. I like it. So we'll just go ahead, do that to all of them. The reason that we do the dry brushing at this stage is because you don't want to get it on things you've already painted. Like, I'm quite happy to go straight over the top of that shield on his chest there, or piece of armour, whatever, and all over his legs. But if you'd already painted that, you'd be struggling, especially at this scale. These models are very small, so even for 28mm they're a little bit small, to be fair. But yeah, you get the hang of this easily. There's no reason you couldn't paint 50 of these in a day. So, in fact, the reason I wanted to do all 4 rather than just painting one miniature for you is really just to show that when you are batch painting, you get a lot more done. And there's a lot of YouTube videos I've watched where people give you these tips, but they don't actually do the whole model. They just go, oh yeah, we're just going to do this little bit and little bit. Then they probably go away and spend about 12 hours on it and come back and tell you it's taken them 5 minutes when it hasn't. So this way you can see a real-time painting of some skeletons. Oh, look at that, messy. Scuffed all that. It's fine. Like I said, we'll be able to go over that later. In fact, the wash on this one still hasn't quite dried in the recess there, so I'll just steer clear of that part for now. What I will do is dry brush that bit later once that one's dried, so you can be thinking about what your colour scheme is going to be from the start, really. I do like red on evil creatures. It's just sort of red for danger, isn't it? So we'll be doing that. Think about what colour you're going to do your arrows, your quiver on the archers. The metal's nice and easy. The rust's nice and easy. In fact, actually, the hardest part of this is probably doing the rust and making sure you don't dry brush part of the skeleton in the rust colour, because we will be dry brushing that as well. Fingers are filthy, look at that. Splashed wash all over it. So I may have already mentioned this in the previous part at the start, but we've kept the shields off. It's up to you, you can put them on. It's just easier to paint models without shields, especially if you're doing some dry brushing, and it's no extra effort just to glue them on at the end, honestly. Seems like it's going to be, seems like a bit of a daunting task doing the shields separately, like undercoating them separately, but really, it really speeds things up. I mean, those are black already, so we can go straight onto the silver there. You won't have to bother painting the black onto the miniature. I would maybe say put a bit of extra effort into the commander, especially if this is going to be for a rank and file unit. Say you're using them in Kings of War. He's going to be at the front of the unit in the middle with his arms out wide, oops, like that. You know, you might want to add a highlight at the end or something, or do some blue glowing eyes on him or something like that. But I won't be doing that. In fact, that might be a good little tutorial actually, to do the glowing eye effect on these. Perhaps I'll add that onto the next ones, add that onto the list. So there we go. Smashed it, lovely. There we have it. 4 skeletons. And they're already looking decent, I love it. I love painting. In fact, doing these tutorials is brilliant for me, really, because there's absolutely no reason for me to be painting skeletons, but I have missed painting them. I used to enjoy those. So there we go, they're dry brushed. Your next step is probably cloth. So we're going to be doing these in red. So I'm going to use Khorne red. Ignore the fact that that's an airbrush paint. You know when you put those orders in on the internet and you're like, oh, or you pick it up in the shop and you're like, oh yeah, I've got some Khorne Red. You get home and you're like, oh God, it's airbrush. Doesn't matter. All it means is it's just not going to last you as long as another paint probably. I just use that straight out the pot. Essentially, it's watered down, perfect, good to go. Then we're going to highlight that with Mephiston Red, but we're not going to do that until we've put all the base colours down. So we're going to do Mephiston Khorne Red on the cloth. Then we're going to black out all the metal, and we're going to do the leather, which we're going to do in Mournfang Brown. I'm tempted to do my quivers black and then do black bows. So if there's one thing I do hate painting, it's arrows actually. So once you get these base colours down on the weapons and cloth, they really come to life. So I'm just going to put this straight on to the cloth areas. So just in here. Again, don't worry too much if you make a mistake at this stage, because we've still got that extra layer to put on the bone. Now, you might put some red in an area that you're not going to be putting a bone highlight on, but that doesn't matter. We'll just highlight that bit anyway, and then it'll actually look fine. So, what a lot of people get caught up in, or caught up with, is making mistakes and then getting frustrated and thinking that they have to go and rectify that mistake immediately. That is absolutely not the case, because 9 times out of 10 you can highlight over that mistake to cover it up. So you're really just wasting time by washing your brush, putting a bit of bone back on and carrying on. You just leave it. We'll get it at the end, no biggie. I mean, I used to get caught up in that big time. It used to take me ages to paint a miniature. I'd put a bit of red on his bone, on his shoulder or something by mistake, get frustrated, wash my brush, try and wash it off straight away. Then that wouldn't work. So then I'd get some bone straight out of the pot to try and put directly over the red because I just wanted it done. Then what would happen is the red would mix with the bone and, yeah, nightmare. But luckily, over the years, I've just realised that that is a complete waste of time, and all you need to do is just a highlight over the top of it. So, not 100% sure if that's meant to be red, but hey ho. If you're not sure whether something's meant to be a certain colour, no one else is going to know, are they? So, bits of cloth there, that looks like cloth to me. There we go. Nice bit of Khorne Red all over there. That's the cloth done on that one. So I'll just go through these. It's at this point, I think it's worth just going back and checking the eyes, because your Agrax will now be completely dry, and as you can see the eye, on that one on the left is a bit lighter than the other one. And I'm just going to put a dot in there. Again, don't get stressed if you get this all over the bone on the outside, because we can rectify that later. But it is important that the eyes look nice and dark. So there we go. So that's all the red done on those little bad boys. Looking decent. So next it's to black the weapons. Lovely. I'm using Abaddon black. Any black will do. So get an old brush. You should always get your paint out the pot with a crappy old brush. I am literally... Now you don't have to black your weapons out. The reason we're doing it is because, number one, the metal is going to be silver and it looks better after it's had a black undercoat. Number two, the bows are going to be black, so that makes perfect sense. Now we'll start with the commander. A bit of paint there. So all the metal bits, let's black them out. And because we've watered it down, should go on a little bit better. Less effort. Again, don't worry too much if you hit a piece of bone. I mean, it's a terrifying prospect, isn't it? Getting black on something that's essentially nearly white. But we're actually going to be highlighting or touching up with a base colour. So rather than strictly adhering to the highlighting rules, we're going to be using a nice base coat colour. So it's going to go over anything, pretty much. So it won't matter if you make a mistake. I mean, obviously, it's better if you don't make a mistake. I'm just saying, if you do, chill out. It's fine. Don't worry about it. There we are. Lovely. So yeah, you could just go directly over with silver if you wanted to save a bit of time. But I think it's worth the extra effort. Another thing about painting miniatures quickly is you can pick some parts of the miniature that you're going to do a decent job of, and some parts where you can save a lot of time. So, you know, the dry brushing saved us time, so that gives us a bit of extra time to play with when we come to doing the rust on the weapons and things, make that look nice. If you can make a few things pop out on the miniature, stand out, then it will be worth it. Bases, faces and weapons, that's the golden rule really. The face is looking good, do something with the weapons, make the bases look nice, and they'll look alright. Right, that's that. All of his areas that are going to be metal are black. That's that one done. I still haven't actually decided what colour to paint these quivers. But I do know that the bows are going to be black, so just whack that on there. I'm sort of tempted to tie them in and paint the quivers black as well. There's one thing I hate, it's highlighting black. So I do avoid it if possible. Another thing that's worth noting actually is we're picking colours here, like the dark red, the silver, the straps are going to be brown. We're picking colours that we can wash with one wash, so we don't have to keep interchanging the washes and waiting for them to dry and things. We're going to just wash it all with Agrax. Obviously that doesn't include the black. We won't be washing that at all. So there we are. Yes, let's do the leather. So for that we're going to use Morn Foam Brown. So this is, we're looking at straps here basically. I mean, what is he wearing? Fancies himself a bit, I think, this guy. He's got this strange belt thing here. Again, don't worry about mistakes. It is very nice to have painted miniatures on the table. I mean, hopefully these techniques, but these corner cutting exercises will help you get your miniatures on the table quicker. I think, you know, I'd much rather have 100 skeletons painted like this, ready to go on the table, than 5 that are painted absolutely brilliantly. Sometimes people forget about the actual enjoyment of painting. There was a long period for me where I just only ever painted things when I was going to a tournament and it was a unit that I needed because I wanted to win that event or something. And I sort of lost touch really with the actual buy a box of models just for the sake of painting it, and I've really got back into that now. So I think mainly due to the YouTube channel really. So it's really nice just to pick up a model and have a go. Right, that's his straps done. Next up, we're going to do the, okay, we'll do the quivers now. So we said we'd go for a darker brown, which I failed to get out. So let's have a look. I actually think Steel Legion Drab might look quite nice. That might look quite nice. Or Rhinox Hide. Yeah, let's go with Rhinox Hide. Dryad Bark was the next one I was going to have a look at, but do you know, if I had £1 for every time I opened a new pot of paint and then found one that was already open about 10 minutes later, I'd have about £4. Right, here we go. Let's get that quiver done. Oh yeah, that fits nicely. Happy with that. It does go nicely with the scheme, that one. I did just pause that there as we had all the recycling collected outside, all the bottles going in the bin, but I did, just while that was happening, just quickly finished off the Rhinox Hide on the quivers. So I decided to go for grey cere. It's white. It's not white, but it's good for doing white. So I think we're going to do these flecks of the arrows in that colour. And the feathers there. Probably should have painted the arrow shaft first. I'll do that on the next one, just in case you make a mistake. There's a chance that this could be too sandy, too bony, but at the same time you don't want to paint the arrows too bony either, because they'll just match up with the bone of the skeleton. So I think this is looking okay actually. I think we'll take that one. So that looks okay. So I've actually got quite a lot of paint on my brush here. I've started to rush it a little bit. Just trying to get in there. Again, I think I said this on the last video that I did. If you can't get your brush in somewhere and you're worried about it, like that you haven't painted a certain part of the model, don't worry, because if you can't get the brush in there, then it's unlikely anyone's ever going to comment on it. You'll know, you'll be disappointed, but after about an hour of looking at the finished model, I can promise you won't care. Next, we're going to do the silver on the weapons. So Leadbelcher for that one. I am just going to mix a little bit of that with Lamian medium, to be fair, just to make it go on a little bit easier. They will start to look good now. Just get that silver put down. You can cover the whole thing. Equally, you could try and leave the recesses dark if you want to, but we're going to be washing it anyway, so not really much point. So there we are. That's him. That's his weapon done. And we're going to do his helmet and his breastplate same way. Now's the time just to make sure they're not wearing any rings or anything on their hands or circlets on their arms or anything. You want to get those silver while we're on the silver. Might look a bit bright now, but it won't when we're finished. We'll be toning that down with some washes and rust. So there we go. It's him all silvered up. Missed a bit in there. He's not wearing anything on his legs, so move on to the next one. So you've got your arrowhead. Your knee pad. I tend not to worry too much about the backs, but you know, you might as well do it while you're here. Touch on the top there that I've missed. Okay, 2 down. Really starts to speed up towards the end when there's less bits to paint. There we are. Arrow tip, and he's got a breastplate. Oh, there we go, I've got a bit on that hand there. So hopefully we'll remember to touch that up later on. And the last one. It's actually important to use the bigger, well for me, use the largest brush that you feel comfortable with. Because the larger the brush, the less time you're going to spend applying brush strokes. So, in fact, I've got a lot of really small brushes that are still brand new that I've never touched now. I just don't seem to need them as much. No. I mean, you can paint about 500 sets of eyes with one brush as long as you're just using it for eyes. Last you ages. Right, there we go, done. That's all the silver on all the skeletons done. So we're going to let that dry. In fact, let all the layers dry that we've just done. Then we're going to apply washes. It'll be Agrax. Actually, no, we're not. We're going to put Typhus Corrossion. It's a technical paint from Citadel. It's been around a long time, but that's got little bits in it. So we'll be painting that onto some of the metal areas where we want the rust to show up. It does look quite good for like a mucky dirt type look as well. So let's have a look at what we've got so far. Right, there we are. That's your 4 skeletons so far. They're looking quite nice as a group. Lovely. I'll go make a cup of tea while that dries and then come back and do the next bit. Right, well I was going to edit this out because I've just spilt a load of paint everywhere. But, you know, what I thought I'd do is prove that everyone makes mistakes. So there's a load of Typhus Corrossion there. If anyone wants to come round to my house quickly and do about 300 models worth of rust with that Typhus Corrossion, you're more than welcome. Right, so with the Typhus Corrossion, we're just going to paint little bits where we think we want the rust to be. if you want to put some real effort into it, you can have a look at pictures of where things really rust. But I am really not interested in that. I'll just be putting it on for show. So realistic or not. So there we go, you can see I've just put it around those bolts there and a little bit on the edge there. So we're going to be dry brushing that. So it's a very small area to be dry brushing, but I'll show you how we're going to do that when we get there. Plenty of rust on these. It's what's going to make them pop out and look a bit different. Nice rusty arrowhead. No one wants to get shot with a rusty arrowhead. Oh, look at all that, what a waste. Plenty of rust on the sword, just dab it on. In fact, not being neat with this is a good idea. It probably looks a bit more natural, doesn't it? There we go. The breastplate as well. I mean, you don't have to paint the whole area that you've selected as rust. What you can do is just dry brush some of it, and then the rest of it will just look like a sort of dirty effect. But we're also going to wash the metal in brown to give it that weathered, ancient look. There we go. That does take quite a while to dry, so what we'll do is we'll leave that for a little while, go and do something else, then pop back and we'll be dry brushing on Ryza Rust next. The reason for that is because we'll also be washing that with Agrax Earthshade. So once we've done the Ryza Rust, we can wash all these little things that we've done, the cloth, the wood, the Ryza Rust, etc. It's all about keeping those processes to a minimal. Right, lovely, that's all dry. I've managed to get some more light in the room now. I didn't realise how dark it was outside. What we're going to do next is the rust areas. We're going to dry brush, well, it's not strictly a proper dry brush, with Ryza Rust. So, because of the small areas that we're going to be doing, I'm actually not going to use a dry brush. I'm just going to use a, this is a Citadel base brush. And I'm not going to take too much paint off it, just a little bit. But then I'm just going to brush it gently. So I'm not going to force this down. This is very gentle. And you'll see it starting to work like a dry brush. But you don't want a lot of force on this because you'll be pushing it onto the bone. So feel free to use the edges of the brushes, just whatever you can really to get that rust to come up. So this is for the smaller areas, we're doing it this way. Just very gently. And on the helmet you can be a bit more rough. You're not going to hit anything with that one that you're not supposed to. So yeah, be a bit more rough on these areas. And it's actually fine to get it on the silver areas as well. If anything, I would say I'm not that happy with the breastplate at the moment, but it'll look fine when we put the wash on. There we are. This is for the sword area. But again, you can be less careful now on that one because there's no bone to hit. Does look a lot nicer if you can dry brush it roughly and vigorously. Okay, so that's him. That's his rust done. And if we compare that to the one that we did earlier, it's fairly similar. But obviously I could stand to do a bit more there. So I will do, try and get them a bit more coherent with each other. But again, they don't need to be. I mean, this skeleton might have been underground for a bit longer, or he might have more rust on his sword. A bit of variance isn't bad, so there we go. He's not far off being finished now. So I'll just dry brush the rest of these bits of armour, and then we'll come back for the next stage. Okay, so that's the rust done on all those guys. I actually thought I was being the cleverest person in the world there, and I decided to use a bigger brush on this one, but I managed to get it all over his arrow shaft. So we'll have to touch that up. Again, not an issue. We don't mind making mistakes. It's not a problem. So next up, we've got the Agrax. So we've already selected colours that we know work with Agrax Earthshade, which is essentially any colour really. And what we're going to do is we are going to find that brush that we've just put somewhere first. There it is. And we're going to wash all the areas that we've just painted. So we're washing the red, again, don't need to worry too much about it getting on the bone or anywhere, because we'll be putting that final layer on the bone at the very, very end, which will cover up any mistakes. Now, straps are always an interesting one when you're washing these, because depending on the sculpt, there might not actually be a recess in the middle of that strap. So you have to just dab it on, and it almost, well, it just creates its own line, and then don't worry about going to the edge of the strap and getting it on the bone, because you want that. You want that dark area where the strap meets the body. Like so. Pull that around. So the area that you've just done with Ryza rust, we'll wash that too. That's when it really comes alive then, the rust. Look at that, that's great. I like that a lot. Anywhere where you've really overdone it with the rust, you can put extra wash on. And then you want to wash all the silver bits as well in this. Normally for, you know, Imperial soldiers, just human type things, you'd probably use Nuln Oil on the metal areas, but because these want a weathered, dirty armour look, we're using Agrax. So that's that. All nicely washed. Oh, there we go. Like, what did I say about the straps? Always miss the straps. Don't forget those. And then we'll just rinse and repeat that with everything. I'll do an archer now, so you can see the same sort of thing on the arrow shafts. Now, you can wash that white that you did, but it'll go that weird colour like that. So you just take that off with a clean brush, and we'll do something a bit different with that at the end. So we'll just wash the arrow shaft itself, just for that colour difference. And you want to wash the arrows in the quiver. I washed the quiver there just purely out of habit, but in fairness, that probably wanted to be Nuln Oil, a bit darker. Okay, wash the rust again, as we did before, all the red. Wash that strap. Lovely. There we go. Right, I'll just wash the other ones and then we'll come back for the next step. Right, so now that all of your washes are dry, we're going to highlight the red. So we're using Mephiston Red to go over the top of your Khorne red. So just want to get the edges of the cloth, like so. Doesn't need to be absolutely perfect, but there's no more washes to go on this now or anything like that. So this is the last stage on the red. So just make sure you're happy with it. Do a bit more or a bit less than this if you like, but just a nice sort of 1/2 mil brush stroke down the edge of the cloth. And also, if you see there's a little bit that I've managed to get some that I missed last time with the red, but that's okay because it's right on the edge. We can just highlight straight onto there. Right. So happy with that. If you want to brighten it up, you can just go over it again with the same colour. There we are. That's one. And this one, I'll show you that one more time. So you're just getting a fairly small amount of paint on your brush. Ideally, if you can use the edge of the brush, that'll be better. But I find with these models, it's so close to the bone that you actually need to use the point. But that's okay. Just be steady and gentle so the bristles don't spread apart and hit other things, and you should be fine. There we are. Right, I'm using the airbrush paint again actually, so it's worth mentioning that you would want to water your paint down here. Couple of reasons: it goes on better, and if you make a mistake it's easy to wipe it off. So it does look very bright when you first put it on, but obviously when that dries it'll dry down a little bit. Like I said, if you want it to be brighter, you can go and put another layer of this on the edge. If you want it even brighter still, you'd put Evil Sun Scarlet as another layer on there, but I mean, these are rank and file troops. I think one base colour and one direct highlight is probably enough there. So that's those. I've already done the bowman, did that before I started the video. So this is where we're up to now. They're all looking pretty decent. As you can see, where we washed the arrows and the quiver, they actually look quite nice now. The arrow on the bow looks reasonable, but what we're going to do with that is, these aren't the most detailed miniatures in the world, so you'll struggle to get a lot out of the feathers. So when you wash it, you'll find the recesses aren't very deep. Other skeletons, other arrows may vary, obviously, but what we're going to do, just hopefully this will add a little bit to it. We're just going to use a bit of contrast apothecary white, and we're just going to put that on there. It's almost unnoticeable, but it just adds that touch to the feathers. And if you really wanted to make these look better, you could then go back and re-highlight the edges. But I won't be doing that. Like I said, these are just rank and file models. There we go. That does actually look decent, to be fair. Yeah, so Apothecary White straight out of the pot on there. Just adds a little bit of flavour in there. So you can highlight the bows if you want to. So we painted those black. So pick a grey that you're happy with. Or another interesting thing is highlighting black with blue, bluey green. I like highlighting with this one because it adds a sort of, that's what I'm going to do, by the way. I'm going to use Incubi Darkness for my black highlight. I think it adds like a sort of almost magical type look to it. So don't be afraid to give new things a try. I'll just put that on there, just highlight the bow just on one edge first. So subtle that it's quite hard to notice, but when you've got the miniature in your hand and you're looking at it yourself, you'll see that, and it does look all right. I prefer it to grey on sort of magical evil models, especially if you're painting like creatures of the night sort of thing. The blue really adds something, but equally, you could just use a grey, fairly dark grey. I quite like the Vallejo grey black, it's called, or it might be called black grey, either way. That is very subtle. But you could use Storm Vermin Fur, Eshin grey, that sort of thing. Again, there is no right or wrong, it's just whatever you're happy with. But I do think you should give this a try if you've not done it before. It looks nice. See, I missed a bit with my black there, but that's fine. I can just go straight over this with the highlight. We're not going to worry about going back in time, re-blacking the bow. It's just a waste of time. So there we go. That's that highlighted. As I say, very difficult to see on the camera, but it does look good. That's that one done and out of the way. So we're really getting down to the very final parts of this now. So you can highlight the leather straps if you like, which is Scrag Brown. If you remember, we did them with Mournfang Brown. This is absolutely not necessary for the amount of brown on the model. It's not really needed, this, but it will look better. But this is a step you can completely miss out. Looks nice, but if you really don't want to do this, don't bother. I mean, when you're thinking about, say, painting 30 of these, you probably don't want to go around 30 models and put this tiny little highlight on them, and there's no shame in that. Because you could probably, in the time that you've highlighted 30 of these leather straps, you could probably paint another 5 or 6 skeletons. And it is, because it's the last part of the process, the highlight, it is something that you could come back and do another day. So if you get all these painted without that final highlight and then you think, you know, I should have done that, well, that's fine, you can do it. You can just come back and do it when you've got more time or when you feel a bit more confident. And it's just not a problem. I mean, I very rarely go back to things. Once I've said that model's good enough and it's on the table, I think, yeah, I could go back and highlight that next year. I don't think I've ever done it. So there's always a different project to be getting on with, isn't there? Last thing you want to do is go back and paint the buckles on 300 dwarves you painted last year when you've got a nice new shiny tank to paint or something. So there we are. As you can see, it hasn't taken long just to put that little highlight on it. Does it look any better? Slightly. that is completely your choice. So there we go, that's that. So the only stages we've got left now are highlighting the quiver at the back, which, oh, by the way, I did go, while the camera was off, I did actually run a null oil wash over those. It does look better. So highlighting the quiver, could probably use a bit of dryad bark, but might be better off with Mornfan brown or something. I've decided to go with Gorthor brown for my quiver highlight, just on the edges. Probably run a little line across there as well. Don't need to go nuts here. Oops, sorry. So I've just done the edges there and there. Probably run a little bit down there as well. Highlighting things with round edges is a little bit tricky, but you just, less is more. Just put that line down there and be done with it, to be honest. And I'll show you again on this one because I didn't have that in the best position for you there. So we're just going on along this top of the quiver here, and there, and then a nice little line down there. Don't know if anyone else does this, but I tend to do the action, sort of warm up the action with my fingers and then lower it onto the bit that I'm painting. So I know I'm going to be going down there like that, and then when I come to do it, I'm already in line with that. That's quite a thick highlight, that. So what you do, rub the edge, that's fine. So that's it. That leaves us with one final stage, not including the shields, which we haven't come to yet. They go on at the end. We have next the bone. So this is the last stage on the bone. Again, this doesn't need to be done, but what I've got here is Wraithbone. So that's very light. Now if you put this directly on, it's gonna be too much. So as you can see, the different colour in the skulls there. So this one has had this final Wraithbone almost a glaze, and this one hasn't. So if you want to keep this dusty, worn look, fine. If you want to go that extra mile, then it's Wraithbone. Doesn't have to be Wraithbone, it can just be any bone colour that's lighter than the bone that you've got. Now, this is potentially a shade too light, so you could use a different one. But so what we're going to do is we're going to put a bit of that out there, and then we're going to water it down with clean water. So if you've watched the beginner's tips, if you've watched that full playlist through, you'll have seen the benefits of having 2 water pots to 1. If not, I'll tell you again, and that is, you've got a dirty water, which you'll wash your brushes off in, clean the most of the paint, and then the clean water is to do the last bits of cleaning on your brushes, and also for adding to paint to water it down. So there we are. So now we've got this. What we're going to do is we're going to paint this over the top here. It's almost a glaze, but it's a bit thicker. Now, don't be alarmed that it looks like you're painting over all the work that you've done. Because you've watered it down, that's going to dry back. If it is coming out too thick, then you can add more water to it. But it should look, essentially, it should look very wet when it's on the model. Almost like a wash. You see that? Now that's going to dry down, and that's going to look absolutely fine. So you can do that on any part of this model where you think it would be where the bone would be a bit more bleached, so perhaps around the eyes there, on the skull, around the chin, along this sort of jawline area. You can go to town on it. You can do it down the arm, across this bit of the arm, this bit, and what that'll do is that'll make that pop, that'll make that model. Even though you're not doing it everywhere, it'll look like it's got a more white finish to it. Get the rib cage. Personally, I actually like to do it over all of the model, but as long as you do the head, the minimum is the head really, it'll look fine. So, but I am just going to do everything all down there. I mean, we're not trying to get the middle of the bone, we're simply doing the rounded edges, sort of highlight areas. Nice big part of the backbone there, well, back of the leg bone. So yeah, as I say, we're just literally just picking out all the bits that you would highlight normally with a normal colour, just putting this sort of bony glaze over everything, just to make it look that bit. See, the shoulder blade is perfect really for it. Put plenty of it on there, down here. Then there we go. So that's looking nice and white now. Pull this bit in and this bit. Then we'll go back and have a look at the head, see how that's dried. Now that's dried quite smooth, so we probably don't need to mess with it, but I can't help it, so I'm just going to put a bit more in. Make it even brighter on the top. You've got to know when to stop, and I think that is it. Now let's compare that to the other skeleton. He's got a nice white, see that? Much whiter, much nicer finish to it. So we'll do the same again with this. Again, don't need to be amazingly careful. And don't forget, if you've made any mistakes throughout now, with the other colours, if you've accidentally put a tiny bit of red on the bone, or on any part of, or black on the bone, or anything like that, that's a nice area to get done, the middle bit there. You can cover it up with this because it's a base colour. It might take 2 coats, but it doesn't matter. You can cover up all your mistakes now. Anything you've done. This is why it's important not to mess about trying to cover up the mistakes when you first make them, because there's often a process towards the end that's going to rectify that for you, and you save a lot of time. So I'm just doing this one very quickly, just to show that it is so quick, how quick it can be done. The last one, I really wanted to give you an idea of how to do it. This one, we're just going to very quickly do it. There we go. As you can see, you get less and less careful there. I've put a little bit in there where I shouldn't have done, but because we've watered it down, we'll take that straight out. Lovely. Looks fine. Now, if that hadn't been watered down, that would have been more tricky to get out there. So there we go. For me, that's another one done. Perhaps I'll just do his eye sockets again. Give that a nice little glazy highlight there. Perhaps we'll get this little bit in here. Lovely. There's another white skeleton. Okay, there we are then. So we've got 4 nice off-white skeletons now. That's what we were aiming for. They look decent. They look good, actually, to be fair. Next stage, we're just going to stick the shields on. So your archers are essentially done now. Don't worry too much about the painting the inside of the shield first, unless you know it's going to be an issue. Like, you put this one on here, you know that's going to be fine, you can get the brush in there. So we'll stick those on. So we're going to use super glue for this, because although the models are plastic, plastic bonds plastic, but there is no plastic to bond now because you've covered it in paint. So dab of super glue. I think I like this shield for this one. Yep. Just going to pop that on there. He looks mean now. Oops, it won't look so mean if that comes off. And same for the commander. Now, he gets a little slightly better shield with all the little bubbles on it. There we go. And then if you just make sure his hand's in the right place on the inside, you'll notice I didn't paint the shield handle in his hand there. I just don't bother. It's something I very rarely do. You can do it if you like. So now, while that's drying, I will show you very quickly how we get round these little bases. So, this is how I like to do it. So we've got the model, and let's say you don't want it on this base, you want to glue it on a multi-base for Kings of War, or you want to put it on a 25mm base for Age of Sigmar, or you just don't like these little bases. Don't try and cut across the bottom of there with the scalpel. Don't try and separate the foot from the base. What we're going to do is we're going to cut around the foot as close as you can. Doesn't matter if you have to do it in 100 cuts, just cut around it. This is one of the most time-consuming parts of miniatures supplied like this, to be honest with you. But, you know, if you've got an audio book or something, you can just sit down and do all these at the very end. And there is still one saving grace as well if you make a mistake. So if you cut this guy's foot off, for example, or if you can't get it as neat as you would like it, we've still got the basing materials to go on. So you'll be able to cover up any huge errors with a bit of gravel, tuft of grass, something like that. So never be disheartened if you accidentally lop some toes off or something. So this is where we are with that now. Oops, there we go. So what you need to do now is you need to get this off. Now if you go ahead and try and cut that off, what I guarantee will happen is the clippers will slide up into the foot and take half the foot off. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to use a scalpel, and we're going to just lay that flat. The scalpel's sharper and more accurate than the clippers, and we're just going to cut straight through it. I'll just show you that with the focus. I'll go on there a little bit for you. Just change that so you can see. That is going to go straight through that. You've got to be careful. There we go. Done. You'll find there should always be a way that you can lay the miniature so that the foot is flat. The side of the foot is flat to whatever you're cutting on. If there's not, you run the risk of snapping the leg. So now that's like that. The next thing we'll be doing is shaving off the rest of it. I mean, if you're competent with a scalpel, you should have no problems here whatsoever. Just be careful with it. Make sure you don't lop your finger off. Okay, and we'll get to a point eventually where from the top you won't be able to see it. You can put it back down on the cutting mat or whatever you're using and have a good trim around there. Okay, so that's starting to look fine now, and then we'll go back to shaving it a little bit. Doesn't matter if you've left 0.5 mils worth of plastic on here. You can probably get it perfect, but that will do. See that right hand foot? Well, it's actually the skeleton's left foot, but right on the camera. That's going to be fine. And what the benefit of this as well, a real bonus, is you don't have much surface area for gluing these two bases because the feet are very small. So if you use super glue, you know, you drop that miniature, or you know, a bit vigorous during a game or something, that's coming off. He's going to just snap straight off. But what you've inadvertently done now is you've created a contact area of plastic which has no paint on it. So now you can go and glue that to a base using plastic glue. I mean, you know that's okay when he's standing up on his own like that without a base. But you can go now and glue that to a plastic base, and you'll get the proper plastic glue bond. And that's brilliant, because that's what you want with these flimsy foot skeletons. Flimsy-feeted skeletons. Yeah. So that works out really well. And that's why I advise doing it at the end. That's what a really great thing to have, is a proper plastic bond. Because now you're gonna drop that during a game, or even if you're multi-basing, whatever, you've got a nice area there to glue. If you're multi-basing, you'll be gluing it to some sort of texture anyway, so maybe it wouldn't make such a difference. But if you're going on to plastic bases, that's definitely the best way to do it. And even if you're not, I think it's still better to do it that way. As you can see with the one that I've already painted and based, I'll get a bit of a close-up there for you. So he was done in the same way. His feet look fine. I've built a little bit of the texture up so that he's to cover up the edges, the rough edges. And he is bonded on plastic. He's not going anywhere. So that's brilliant. So now all that's left to do with those, clip the bottoms of the bases off and stick them on the bases. You've got the shields to paint. I can probably leave you to do the shields, but I will show you. But you're essentially just painting it in exactly the same way that you did the sword. So you want silver, then a bit of Typhus Corrossion, followed by some Ryza Rust, followed by a wash of Agrax. So I'll go away and do that, and then we'll have a look at the finished product even. So another thing you might find, you may have already undercoated your bases. So if you want to recreate that plastic bond, this shouldn't be a big deal. Some people undercoat their bases so that the texture paint adheres to it better. If that's the case and you have done that, there you go. Just wanted to show you that quickly, that you can just very easily just scrape some of the paint away. That's where you'll be gluing that guy. Right then, so they're all now bonded to plastic bases. I've deliberately, with this one, left it looking a bit shoddy around the feet there. You know, as we said about clipping the bases off, if you did make a mistake, you could rectify it later. Well, we'll be showing you there how easy that is. Still haven't painted the shields. Not an issue. So I'm going to be basing these using Astro Granite Debris, because I just want a grey base suitable for Dungeons and Dragons. So I suspect the skeletons won't be hanging around in a forest. They'll probably be mooching about in a cavern somewhere. So this goes straight on. Okay, let's get that nice and in focus. I'm just going to put that straight onto the base. I actually didn't realise that this texture applying tool was any good, really. I was actually using it for green stuff in holes, but it does seem to do its job quite well. So what we're going to do is, when we get to this bit that we've cocked up, we're just going to push that up onto the lip of the foot. It's gravel, so there's absolutely no reason why that skeleton wouldn't be sinking into the gravel ever so slightly. I mean, if you did it on every one, it might not look amazing, but you know, you're not going to make mistakes on every one, are you? Only on a few, hopefully, when you're chopping that base off. That's that really. That's just the easy way of rectifying a mistake. I mean, it will happen. I mean, you might chop an entire foot off. If you chop an entire foot off, my advice to you is to get a grass tuft or similar, and then glue the grass tuft on underneath where the foot's going to be, and then just jam that foot in there, make it look like his foot's hidden in the grass. But that might not even happen, eh? So maybe don't worry about it. It's just an option. It's an out for you if it does happen. So we'll just slap all this stuff all over it. Get that sorted out. I'll do this for the others. And then I'll go on to the finishing touches, which will be those 2 shields and what to do with this base. This takes quite a while to dry. Ideally, you want to leave it a couple of hours before you start messing with it. If you're going to dry brush it, then yeah, I'd probably leave it for 2 hours, definitely. I mean, and if you're going straight onto plastic as well, without putting any paint on the base, you may well want to leave it 3 or 4 hours. You'll find it all flecks away when you start dry brushing it. So that's that, there we go. Now, that foot is not an issue, is it, anymore? And then you can just pull it away slightly. Get that off there. And at the end of the day, if you have to go back and put a tiny little bit of paint back on it, just to touch it up, that's no biggie. So I'll get those all to this level now, and then we'll come back and do the shields. Okay, so the process for the shields, identical to the process you use to paint your swords, well, or any of the other silver. So just get that silver on there, nice and quick. Should have used a bigger brush. Again, doesn't need to be incredibly neat at this stage. It's going to be, we're going to add Typhus Corrossion to it. We're also going to add Ryza Rust, and then we're going to add a wash of Agrax Earthshade. If you want, you can paint all these studs, paint them different colours, gold, whatever, spruce it up a bit. Paint the back of the shield simple silver. Again, that's going to be washed. That's going to be made nice and dark. At this point, if you decide you would like to paint that handle there, you can paint that. And that's that, done. Ready for the next stage. Actually, one of the reasons that I like to do the shields at the end and put them on is, well, number one, it makes the model easier to paint. That's the actual proper reason. But if you've just done the bases like I have, let's imagine you've got 20 skeletons with shields, or even 30. If you do it this way, then by the time you finish painting all those shields, your bases might well be ready to be given a wash. So you can really save a bit of time there. You know, you're still painting while you're waiting for something to dry, which is nice. See, I've got a bit of Ryza Rust on there before, eh? Whoops-a-daisy. There we go. Lovely. so now it's back to Typhus Corrosion. I'll use a bit of a worse brush for that one, I think, because it does mess your brushes up, does Typhus Corrosion. The bits in it get everywhere. So again, apply that as how you feel, really, randomly. In fact, don't even try and think about it, because you'll end up doing some sort of neat pattern. If you just blather it on, you've got more chance of it looking natural. One rusty shield there. And the other one. And behind. So we know this takes a while to dry, so go away, do something else. And then come back and dry brush that in Ryza Rust. And we're there then, aren't we? Another thing you can do while you're waiting for things to dry is go around your bases. Black in those bases. They do look a lot better if you go around the edge in black. I know it's already black, but as you can see, we've got plenty of the Astro granite debris just hanging over there. So we just go around there and black in these base edges. Just gives it a nicer finish. No flecks of grey hanging down anywhere. There we are. We'll just do that on all those. Right, so there we are, that's all dried. Just need to put a bit of Ryza Rust on there. Dry brush that on nicely. Have a bit of fun with it. And that rust's coming up lovely now. Remember from before, if you get any areas a bit too bright for your liking, it doesn't matter, because we're going to be putting a wash on it anyway. So I think if you just support the other side of the shield while you're doing the inside, because they can pop off. There we are. Be careful not to press on too hard in case you've got some excess paint in the inner regions of the brush. Again, just support the outside of the shield. Lovely. That's that then. If you want to add some extra detail to your rust areas, you can just put a few flecks of silver. Go back and put a little bit of that on. Now, I'm not even going to wait for this Ryza Rust to dry. I'm going to put this wash on now, just to show everyone in the world that it doesn't matter about waiting for things to dry. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. It doesn't really matter too much about waiting for your dry brush to dry. Let's just get that on there. Dab that around. Give it that aged shield look. Nice and dark on the inside. Alright, that's that one. That one looks particularly nice actually. There's a lot for the wash to go into there. We're going to put loads on that one, make it nice and dark. Again, inside liberally, make it darker. It's shaded. There we go. So we've still got the base to wash, plenty of time. That needs to dry, so we'll go away for a bit, do something else and come back later. Okay, all we've got left to do now is to put a wash in here, just to make it look a bit darker. As I've already done it on this one. As you can see, that is quite a lot darker. And then after that, you can dry brush the top of that grey if you like, just to give it a bit of extra depth. So just blather that on there and spread it around. It's not doesn't need to be neat this, we're just basing. And it'll dry down nicely. You will need to let that dry before you start dry brushing anything though, otherwise you'll get the null oil ink in your dry brush. There we go, easy as that. So I'll go and do all those, and then we'll have a look at some finished product pictures. Okay, so here we are. That's what the skeletons look like when they're finished. I'm very happy with those, and for the amount of effort put in, I think that that's absolutely banging. So if you guys feel the same, hit subscribe and hit like and look out for more of the same. Cheers.